Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys stopping by very much. So as I told you guys a long time ago, if I go past, kind of like a certain time in a video, I will be doing a follow-up video. I just call it the light analysis video. So this is it. Yes, so I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. All of my people that are in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay. Kumusta na aking mga kaibigan. I appreciate you guys very much. Anybody who is coming from Russia, I will say privyet and spasibo for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. Gata Kamsky is originally from the Soviet Union, so that's why I have the little flag down there. But let's get rolling into it. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look, see what we have for this game. So we do have e4, we got e6, so we do have the French defense. We got d4, d5, and probably at least 90% of the time, 95% of the time when you play a French, or when you play into the French as white, you're going to be seeing this setup. d5 is just the most logical move, to just attack the center and try to slow down what white is trying to do. They're trying to achieve this ideal pawn center. And so d5 is what you're going to normally play to try to contest that. Same with the Caro-Kann. You're going to have a c6, d5 situation normally going to be coming so. But we do see knight to c3. We see knight to f6. We got e5. And it kind of seems like you're inconveniencing the knight a lot. And you're just going to get a really nice center. But black is actually very good in this position. So knight f comes back to d7. We see f4. We got c5, knight comes to f3, knight to c6. We see bishop to e3, and then we do have queen to b6. And these are all very common logical moves. This is the very point that you're trying to hit as black. So all of these moves are, pretty expected that you're going to see. And then queen to b6 also does put a little bit of pressure on this pawn. But you do kind of have to be careful because a3 is actually setting a trap. You definitely don't want to just grab the pawn because you're going to be looking at knight to a4 and you have just lost your queen. You're probably going to want to give it up for this rook in the corner. So we're not doing that. Wesley so does go pawn takes d4. Knight takes d4, bishop comes to c5, and as you guys can see, there is a lot of pressure on this knight here. And the problem in the position is the bishop is undefended on e3. So you have to do something drastic, and the almost literal only thing you can do is to go knight to a4. Queen goes to a5 with check, and then we do see c3, and this is kind of holding everything together. We do see bishop taking d4, bishop taking d4, knight taking d4, queen taking d4, and you guys can see that we do have lateral control over this knight over here. We do see b6. So we're thinking, do we want to play bishop to b7 or bishop to a6? Bishop to a6 would be nice and juicy because you are going to be messing with white's ability to castle. So bishop does come to e2. We see bishop to a6, and then bishop comes down to d1. And we do have queen over to b5. So we have b4. And I mean, this is a useful move because this bishop is holding this knight over here on a4. Because b4, of course, is going to disconnect the queen from the knight. So we do see rook over to c8. We have a knight down to b2, and you have to be kind of careful as black in this position because you definitely don't want to do something like castles because you're going to allow a4, and then the queen is pretty much forced to c6, and you're going to be looking at b5. So you are going to be forking your pieces. So in seeing that, the queen comes back to c6. We see rook over to c1, and then we actually see the novelty of the game, 18 moves deep, which is castles. And like I always say, it's always interesting when castles is the novelty of the game. But we do have a4 because why not try, let's attempt pushing b5. So the bishop comes down to c4, just making sure that we're good to go and we're safe. The bishop comes over to g4. We see bishop to b3. We got castles by white. And then we do see bishop taking a4 by black. Let's go ahead and snatch a pawn. Snag a pawn. Man, I can't get my words right. So we do have f5 in the position. White is trying to kind of break through or, force a situation where he goes f6 and then g6 comes because you are going to have a really bad weakness on this g7 point. But we have reached the point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see what black plays in this position. Go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So, as I told you guys before, you know, whenever you are in a situation where you're being attacked, of course you want to think about, you know, what's being attacked and what the opponent is trying to do. But something that you really want to be paying attention to is if there's any type of counterattack that you can, you know, you can put in the position. One of the best ways to defend is to actually go on a counterattack. Just like how when you're getting attacked on the flanks, you know, usually you can attack in the center and do pretty good. So the move in this position is actually bishop back to b5. And you are attacking this rook over here on f1 and threatening to win the exchange. So we do see rook f to e1. We got rook f to e8. We see rook up to e3. We see f6, just trying to slow down and you know, stunt what white is trying to do. We see pawn taking e6 and knight taking e5. And this knight is pretty much going to live on e5 forever. There's not a good way to really like move it out of the way. You know, you don't have a dark square bishop, so you don't really kind of have a way to, you know, move that knight out of that square. So the bishop does come to f5. We see g6, and then the bishop comes back to h3. We see queen over to d6. We see rook over to d1. Because this rook is undefended here on c1, you know, there's some possibilities of, you know, capturing this pawn. You know, maybe like a knight redirect or something like that, and taking advantage of that pin. So the rook does come over to d1. We see rook c to d8. We see rook up to d2. Queen goes back to e7, and then we do see rook over to f2. And something I want you guys to pay attention to is black has a light square bishop, and you see white is making all of their movements to make sure that all of their heavy pieces and even their knight are on dark squares. So one of the things that you're going to be doing when you're playing against somebody that has a certain color bishop is you want to start thinking of the other color, and you want to start making sure that your pieces are, you know, on the right squares, because you definitely, you know, don't want to line these pieces up on the same diagonal on a light square diagonal, because this bishop will cause some havoc. So the knight comes back to c6. We see queen down to d2. So you see the retreat move goes back to a dark square also. We do see d4, a rook over to e4, pawn takes c3, queen takes c3. Of course, you had to take with the queen, you know, because you were forked with that, and plus the rook is hitting you too. So that's some nasties. We do see rook over to f8. We got g4. We really don't want this pawn to be pushed because it is going to inconvenience and back up this rook. So we do see rook to d6. Bishop comes down to g2. Knight comes over to e5. We got g5. And, I mean, this is a very clear intent. I mean, we're wanting the pawn to capture here. So we can just go ahead and check here like this. And then we're just going to win us an entire knight. So the rook does take on e6. Pawn takes f6. Rook takes f6. Rook takes f6. Queen takes f6. And then we do see rook down to e3. At the moment, our queen was undefended. So, you know, rook back is just a good way to defend our queen. So the bishop comes back to c6. Because black is up so much material, it is actually beneficial to try to trade pieces down, because then you're just going to have like a superior, you know, material advantage. So the knight comes down to d1. We see queen to g5, because why not threaten checkmate on g2? The rook comes over to g3 to defend against that. The queen comes down to f4. We see knight to f2. And then black does get their desirable pawn trade in, or, you know, piece trade in. Bishop takes g2, king takes g2. We see knight over to c4. Queen comes to d3. We see knight to e3 with check. The king comes back down to g1. So you guys can see that this white king is really, really in the open. So that's why I titled the video the way I did. The knight comes back to f5. Queen comes up to d5. And this is pinning the rook down to the king. You got to try to do something, man. Because, I mean, you know, your king is in some severe danger. So trying to pin down some heavy pieces to your king, you know, is going to do something pretty good for you. And, you know, of course, we're hoping that black doesn't pay attention and play something like this. And then we can just go ahead and just grab the rook for free. But black does not do that. They go queen to c1 with check. The knight comes down to d1. The king comes over to f7. The rook comes over to c3. Kind of a nice little counterattack, but I mean, it's already, you know, kind of a day late and a dollar short. You know, black is in a very superior position. The queen comes back to g5 with check. The king comes to f2. The queen comes to f4 with check. The king goes to g2. The queen goes to g4 with check. The king goes back to f2. The queen comes down to e2. The rook is pinned, but it does still support the queen. So you do have some checks available. The king comes down to g1. The queen comes to e1 with check. The king comes up to g2. We do see king over to g7. And it is in this position that Gata Kamsky does resign the game. And basically what black has done is they've unpinned, their rook. So the rook is really going to want to try to come down to e2 with check. The problem is you cannot move this rook off of this rank. So let's say you try to defend this way. You're going to be looking at... I guess this I feel like this does it doesn't work at the moment. So okay. Queen down to d3. And you can do that, yeah. And then that's just gonna be that. So you have a way to deflect the queen into a fork situation. This is just gonna be some super nasty. So we definitely can't get into that. But just showing you guys one possible scenario. Oh yes, this is something. The computer does want you to do this. So you already are looking like, man, this is bad. Like, it wants you to give your queen away. But if we actually go into a possible scenario, just to play you just like one series of moves, because the white king is so open. If you do place a check on the black king with queen to d7 with check, the rook would come up to e7 to block, queen down to d3. The rook would come into e2 with check. King would come up to f3. Queen to f1 with check. The king would go to g4. The knight would come up to h6 with check. The king would step over to h4. Queen will come to f4 with check, and then after the king comes down to h3, rook taking on h2 is checkmate. This is just one of the many possibilities that you have in this position. So that is that game. So I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Salamat, aking makaibigan. Spasibo to my people in Russia, and I'll see you guys next time.